All right, moving along to the refine here. Looking back now, what I'm basically doing is just masking and polygrouping, or in this case, you could do mask and then go into the polygroup, the brush auto masking menu, and turn on mask by polygroups up to 100, and then just polygroup everything. What I'm doing is masking, doing a subtool split, and then splitting them out, and then I'm going through and doing a close holes operations, geometry, modify topology, close holes, and then just using the move brush to kind of give me thickness. Again, probably not how I would work now, but just a way to kind of take my sculpt and split it up along seams. Of course, you can do live Boolean nowadays, cutting in those edges. Panel loops if you wanted to, but again, I wasn't really ready to commit to anything. I'm just still kind of refining my sculpt, so just really quickly just getting thickness in there, the representative thickness of the lion helmet parts. And then, of course, if you're going to be sculpting on thin surfaces now, make sure you turn on backface masking in your brush options there. Again, this is ZBrush 4R7, so legacy, dated. Don't flame me in the comments about all the new stuff I should be using. This is probably before that was even invented. And of course, I learn new stuff every day. So again, these are legacy techniques, but it's still relevant. There's some good stuff in here. And again, just kind of doing, this is still my refined block out, I would call it, back then. Going through and just kind of figuring out the functionality and how things needed to work. But as new techniques come along, I'll try and shout them out in this voiceover here. So, clay brush, Damien standard brush, clay buildup, and really just kind of going through. And now that I've got the thing split apart, and again, when I usually split apart things in Dynamesh, I'm thinking about refining in a way that defines the functionality of the object, how these objects work. You know, if they're split apart in metal panels and stuff. Here we are with the slash brush. You can go into your comma key and you can use that. Of course, now you can use chisel brushes, vector displacement, brushes, stuff like that. And even this type of thing, I'm playing with different shapes. This would be like the manual fur sculpting technique. I would not do it this way anymore at all. I would go in there with an insert mesh brush, like a hair. If you go to my YouTube channel and you search for hair creation techniques, hair brushes, oh, what was that? There's an anime hair thing I did, just to look for anime hair. It's like level 9,000, whatever that guy is. We did a live stream with techniques, and that's how I would do this, or even my ZBrush 2018 ZBrush Summit controlling curves and hair techniques in that video series. My playlist is how I would do this hair. This sculpting technique is fine, but you can use the insert mesh brushes to kind of put these curly cues in there and give you a lot more control, and then you can Dynamesh it together and give it the illusion of like it was sculpted or pounded out of metal or whatever. But yeah, this is a very tedious method. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this. In fact, if you want to see this method a little bit better, a lot better than what I'm doing, if you do Google ZBrush Gorilla Hair, there's an artist who did fabulously awesome sculpted techniques for hair, way more successful than I'm doing here. So you can check out his methodology. And of course, again, I don't want to say it's dated, it's still valid, but nowadays I would do insert mesh brushes and then Dynamesh it together if I felt I needed to have them look sculpted out of a single surface, you know. Clay block out, clay brush, and again, making sure under brush auto masking, turning on backface masks, so we're sculpting on very thin surfaces. We inserted an eyeball there earlier with a sphere. So, what else? Damien standard, move brush. We're kind of getting to the boring phase of just kind of like, okay, everything's looking about right. Let me go through here and just kind of sculpt these things out. Now I'm starting to get into, like, as I'm refining these things, when do I want to start rebuilding or recreating these shapes with ZRemesher? So you can see I masked out, I duplicated off, ZRemesh half with adaptive size down to 0, get nice even quads, and now you have much fewer vertices to have to mess around with to get much smoother shapes. Also, deformation polished by features. And if you go on my YouTube channel and look at like hard surface, just do a search for hard surface. You'll see a lot of hard surface techniques that, again, I probably would have employed here. But you see I'm putting polygroups in there. You can now crease by polygroups and then keep those surfaces nice and creased. And I'm not even sure if we had dynamic subdivisions. Did we in 4R7? I'm not sure. But definitely using a lot more dynamic subdivisions and not going through, because in this one here, you know, you're subdividing, you're getting all this detail, and it just makes for a really heavy mesh. And I try to use just dynamic and live Boolean as much as possible. Of course, this existed before live Boolean, so that wasn't really an option at the time, but polished by feature was. So you can see I'm using ZBrush to do the heavy lifting for me on those shapes. Get them nice and smooth, or smoother. I still think they're kind of sloppy looking back at them now. And then when you're ZBrushing, you can use Move. If you go into the Move brush under the curve, you can change it to Move Accu, and you can pull out the corners. And when you pull out the corners, that when you're doing ZBrush half, that'll allow you can see me pausing here and pulling out the corners. Then keep ZBrushing. That'll allow ZBrusher to go, oh, you want these to pull to a corner? Great. I'll ZBrush those so that they have sharp corners. And then you can go through there and crease and all that good stuff. And always remember, you can go through and you can frame these things with IMM brushes. You can also go into your depth setting of your masking brush, and you can have it kind of stop at edges. I think if you Google, I just did it, but on my channel, it's like a mask, do a search for like mask depth, and you should be able to find the video on that. I'm going through and slicing those and doing maybe a panel loops, trying that out for some shapes, and then just going in there and being like, you know what? Oh, maybe I am. I feel like I just went through and sculpted it, but maybe, I don't really remember. Taking this, just kind of getting that shape I want. Again, using Move Accu to pull the corners, the Move brush with Accu curve turned on. And then Dynameshing, and then ZBrushing, and then just again going back through and slicing and then panel loopsing to get that kind of, those kind of diagonal loops. And not diagonal in this case, but just kind of built up loops and then just doing panel loops. And then to detail these out, I went just through and subdivided them, and now I would do the equivalent of like a chisel brush or just a Damien standard or a slash brush. Again, hit the comma key on your keyboard, that'll bring up Lightbox, and then you can go grab the slash brushes and you might find something in there that you like. Very cool. And again, this is just call it the refine block out. We're starting to rebuild shape, so it is, some of these pieces are getting a little closer to final, but some of them are still pretty rough. But going through and refining the shape. So we did our rough block out. You can see here's the idea I want, and then go through polish polygroup border. You can mask by border. Under the masking features, you can mask by border, and then invert your mask, and then polish by features, and then ZBrush half, and get nice shapes. You can also do ZBrush with groups turned on like I did there, and that'll give you very nice geometry, and then you can use panel loops and you can do insets. It's just easier to work with ZModeler when you do like a ZBrush instead of just doing like an extraction or doing panel loops without changing the geometry. I just find that it's a little bit more usable if you ZBrush first. Here we're getting into manual retopologizing complex shapes. If you can, going in there and using ZModeler to make these shapes, but sometimes it's just easier just to go, you know what, let's pull out the old retopology tools and just go through and just make this complex shape there. So I'm getting that depth, that thickness there, and then going through and just rebuilding really quickly. And again, you can try and finagle your way into these complex shapes, but I've always found that at the end of the day, a lot of times just going through there, getting your basic shape done, and then massaging those verts and going through and just filling in those edges and stuff like that. It's just faster. And again, now that we have fewer verts to mess around with, it'll be a lot easier to get a nice smooth refined shape out of this border here. There you go. And if I want reference for like where to crease things, I can hit Shift S, and that'll store a screenshot of my sculpt up there on the corner. And then all you got to do to get rid of that is hit Control N, and that'll clear your canvas. So again, just going around, moving the verts around, creasing things where they need to be creased, putting in bevels where they need to be beveled, bringing in my concept sculpt here. Looks like we're going in and ZBrushing an inside thing just so we have some thickness in there, and then you just pull that out. There we go. Just so there's something a little blocking, a little more realistic. I don't know if you've ever seen the inside of that face. I wouldn't spend a lot of time there, but just putting an inside face in there is good. You never want to leave like a one-sided or a open back face on the inside of something. Probably if it ever flips up or the camera goes underneath there, you want to make sure something's there. If I was smart, I would have kept the original ZBrush that I pulled those little flaps off of, but it looks like I had to rebuild that. Here's topology brush, BTO. and then just going in there with thickness and moving those verts around. Again, fewer verts means a little less moving. I could have probably been a little bit more careful, but again, we're just kind of putting in basic shapes in there. And then now when you Q-mesh or you extrude inwards, make sure that you go to display properties and you can flip those normals if you ended up with a flipped looking face. And if it doesn't look flipped, I would check down there anyway. You might have double turned on, and that'll mess you up later on. Here we duplicated it off, grabbed a little extraction, or just taking extruding an edge loop out, and I kept them separate. I think I did an inset just to get like a little extra border. You can also use topology. You can see we did the oh, what do I call it? It's not the gizmo, but the topology. What the hell is that called? I totally forgot. Transpose modeling. Go to my YouTube channel and search for transpose modeling, and that'll tell you how to do. Like basically, you just do scale. You mask something, you use scale, and then you can inset edge rings. And then if you hold down, if you don't use scale, you can just pull out edge loops all you want. So you can do the same thing with the gizmo as far as pulling out edge loops, but edge rings, you're going to need the topology or the transpose line. Same thing here, just kind of doing a little bit of detail work, insetting, Q-meshing, extruding. You know what? They might have had dynamic subdivisions. Like, can I see in here? I got kind of a low-res screen here. And then now again, this complex shape, just easier just to rebuild it. You know, it's only going to take a few minutes. And I'll have to figure out how to Z-modeler this damn thing. Just very quickly going in and rebuilding this. Again, I'm not overly concerned about perfect topology. It's more about getting my edges where I want to crease them. Good enough. So, messy job. You can see, there's some terminations or some gross geometry in there. Of course, you can use Z-modeler to even those edges out too and refine those transition loops a little bit better. But, you know, I figure it out eventually. And then again, storing that screenshot, Shift S, and then knowing where to crease your stuff is good. And then you can just delete your original concept sculpt.